Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I am Tembi Madroshe and today we are doing a little bit of a chit chat. I want to discuss polyamory, sexuality, hetero flexibility or heterosexual romantics, bisexuality, pansexuality, transactional or compensated relationships, sex work, you know, all the things that have been getting people riled up in the past week or so on social media. I thought I'd just add my little 2 cents in there. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Without further ado, let's get into it. Okie dokie, I'm gonna be doing a lot, obviously, because we like to multitask on this channel. I'm gonna be doing my hair, I'm gonna be doing my face, I'm gonna be chatting. Let's see how far we can go. Let's see if I can finish everything I'm trying to do. This is not like a tutorial or anything, so try your best to keep up with the girl. I'm just gonna do like a sleeked down low pony with gel. So I already have this part, but I'm just going to define it a bit more. I'm going to wet my hair, I'm going to sleek it down. It's going to be real cute. So I'm just grabbing a spray bottle to wet it first. I think the first topic I should talk about is sexuality. The reason I'm talking about this sexuality chat is because I was on Twitter and I saw a certain woman basically posting that she is a heterosexual romantic. She defines being a heterosexual romantic as being someone that is romantically attracted to men, and she finds women sexually attractive. And you know what? When I read that, a part of me low-key understood what she meant, because I think a lot of women that I've had like romantic or sexual encounters with are low-key heterosexual romantic, in the sense that they wouldn't necessarily date a woman, but they would have sex with a woman, or they would have a sexual experience with the woman. And someone else could argue that, you know, a lot of this is rooted in internalized homophobia, internalized biphobia, and the sorts. I low-key beg to differ, because I think in general we can't project our own ideas of, you know, sexuality on people, particularly when the person has made the attempt to define themselves and find a way to articulate their own position in terms of their sexuality. I think it's quite unfair, you know, for people or the general public or members of like the LGBTQI community to try to rationalize why that person is not what they're saying they identify as. For me, my response to the tweet was basically, I don't know where I lie on the spectrum, because I'm more inclined to date men. However, my relationships with women tend to be extremely intimate, so it's not necessarily like a sexual rationalization behind engaging in relationships with women. There's always a level of intimacy that extends beyond that, and it's usually like bordering on sisterhood, bordering on friendship, but also bordering on strong intimate romantic experiences. So I would typically identify as a bisexual person, but I guess because gender is so wide and vast, it's difficult to even say that you're bisexual when you could potentially be attracted to, you know, so many different genders or people that identify in different types of ways. So I also am kind of inclined to believe that I Pansexual. It's quite like interesting when you as a person try to define your own sexuality with all like the definitions and the reasonings that exist. But I think the most important thing more than anything is to just be self-aware. This thing takes a lot of strength, like sleeking your hair back, y'all. It's work. I'm just gonna put in the work. And I guess the reason I also want to touch on polyamory is because within, I guess, general society and the LGBTQI community, a lot of people tend to think that bisexuality means that, you know, you are unable to be in a monogamous relationship. And I think that the two don't have to be mutually exclusive, but the way that it's read does not have to be so like prescriptive. And I think a lot of these beliefs come from a large strand of biphobia, because if you're interested in more than one gender, there's the respectability politic wanting to police you from like who you engage to how many people you engage. And like, I know a lot of people tend to be straight identifying and then will term themselves as bi-curious. Well, growing up, that's what I used to think. And it will be like a little quirk that you find about yourself, that, oh, I'm bi-curious, you know, I'm straight, of course, like I love men, I like men, I'm attracted to men, but I like the idea of kissing girls. And trust me, I'm not making fun of this at all. I'm really not making fun of it, but I just think that a lot of that reasoning came from internalized homophobia, because of course mainstream media will idolize or sexualize the idea of women being bi-curious, but not take women seriously who identify as lesbian or bisexual or pansexual or whatever, you know, lies on the spectrum for that particular woman. So with that said, I think a lot of people tend to look down on polyamorous identifying individuals because it is so tied within like that respectability realm of sexuality and the way romantic relationships are viewed in general. Because I think even within like LGBTQ circles, there's still a level that wants to, you know, police people and hold like certain standards of respectability. And the reason I use such a hard gel is because my hair is so high porosity that it absorbs everything. Like if I use a watery gel, it's not gonna do anything. That's basically the whole schlep around polyamory. But now I think a lot of people are more open towards that idea. I'm speaking across all kind of sexualities, whether you're heterosexual, whether you're bisexual, pansexual, trans, you know. I think those kind of relationships are becoming more and more acceptable in society, obviously with varying kind of experiences based on these said sexualities. But I think we are kind of normalizing those kinds of relationships. A lot of the time polyamory is kind of seen as an open relationship, when in my opinion it's not the same thing. Most of the time you find that polyamorous relationships, or as they're represented in mainstream media, typically tend to be more sexual than romantic, while anything that happens outside of the primary relationship tends to be sexual. And I also think they tend to lean on, you know, the pleasure of the man in the relationship, assuming we're talking about a heterosexual open relationship, allowing the man to do whatever he wants to maintain the freshness or the spark of the primary relationship. When a polyamorous relationship differs in the sense that it's not necessarily, or it's not always about sex. Polyamory emphasizes the romance and the loyalty and the love that can be found in a monogamous relationship as well as in a non-monogamous relationship. So most polyamorous relationships are characterized by having a primary partner. This is not always the case, but most of the time you'll have a primary partner, and then you will have your secondary or, you know, peripheral partners. And sometimes you are primary partners with a certain person because that's the person you met first, or I don't know how certain people qualify it or quantify it, but from my personal experience, that's what tends to happen, that your primary partner is the person you were with before, and then once you meet other people, you introduce the idea of wanting to be polyamorous, and you know, that's when it takes form. However, with other people, I think the whole primary partner thing doesn't have to be as stringent, and it also shifts as time goes along. Maybe you might end the relationship with one primary partner, and then, you know, your secondary partner ends up being your primary partner, and so on. I changed venues, so now I'm in my spare room, and there are just certain things that are not here, and it's upsetting me and my homegirls. Okay, I'll be right back. The main characteristics of a polyamorous relationship include transparency, communication, and honesty, because like any other relationship, jealousy does come up. And I think the other important thing is boundaries, because people tend to believe that polyamory does not have any kind of boundaries, no systems that have been put in place to ensure that people's trust doesn't get broken, people don't get hurt. It is a relationship and feelings are important. I think with each relationship it is different, and people set their boundaries based on their context. So there aren't any universal boundaries that any polyamorous relationship could have, but some that, for instance, I could mention from my own experience could include: you can't necessarily be in a relationship with someone that's my friend, or you can't hook up with someone that's my friend. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be a friend, but it could just be someone that's in our circle, someone that is a mutual friend to me, or, you know, someone that I know. Sometimes these boundaries are just based on how the other person will feel. I wouldn't say it's important to determine whether they're fair or not, because you're already in this messy situation of being in love with multiple people. Try to appease everyone as much as possible. I'm just wondering to myself, how do you have a balance of how you treat your multiple partners, or perhaps how do you ensure that each partner gets sufficient attention? And I think it's a bit tricky, because these things need to be as organic as possible, especially when you're dealing with humans, and human interaction is something that can be so fluid. Sometimes you want to talk to a person all day, sometimes you're so busy that you don't have time to do that, and that basically applies to all relationships, your friendships, you know, your sibling relationships, and then obviously your romantic relationships. So the same can apply with polyamorous relationships as well. I'm thinking, if you are, let's say, a person with two romantic partners and the one is your primary, how do you determine how you split your time between those people? Assuming that your primary partner also has, let's say, their own secondary or peripheral partner, how do you determine where you guys fall on that kind of spectrum? There aren't actual answers to these questions. It's more of my own speculation, because I've been in relationships where the person, you know, claimed that they were okay with the idea of the polyamory, and then when it was time to be polyamorous, the person was not quite okay with it. And this doesn't even apply to a specific gender. I've been in both instances where I was in a relationship with a man and the relationship was polyamorous, and I was in a relationship with a woman and the relationship was polyamorous. And this is not like one relationship, these are separate relationships at different times, but I experienced the same kind of outcome where there were tiny glitches regarding how the relationship should function. And it's always centered around jealousy, because I think as individuals we've been socialized in such a way that even if you have unlearned many things, you'll still find certain remnants of how you've been socialized. So if you've been socialized to think that monogamy is the way that relationships function, you will obviously have issues with a polyamorous relationship. And it's not to say people who are polyamorous or people who are more inclined to polyamory don't experience these feelings. I mean, people get jealous all the time, regardless of whether you identify as polyamorous. Jealousy is a normal human feeling, but I think it becomes problematic when you've set the boundaries and the confines of your relationship, and now it's kind of difficult to walk the walk after you've talked the talk. Sometimes you'll be in a polyamorous relationship and the other person kind of holds back on what information they decide to give, and that can be the downfall of a polyamorous relationship. One of the fundamentals of a polyamorous relationship is the transparency. So if one person is more transparent than the other, chances are the relationship is going to feel a bit one-sided. Even within polyamory, people can cheat, right? If things are not done according to your boundaries and according to, you know, the systems you've put in place, it's very possible for the trust to be broken. In a monogamous relationship, it's very clear to see what cheating is and what cheating isn't. And I think a lot of people think that polyamorous relationships confused what cheating is and what cheating isn't, but I think it's quite clear. Sometimes you might not have had those particular conversations, and then when the incident happens, it becomes the time to define that boundary and say, okay, that is now a no-go area. And then you guys swiftly move on and you mend whatever occurred. But sometimes you guys have had that conversation and then the person goes and does exactly what you decided was not going to be done, and then it's quite evident that the person cheated or, you know, broke the trust or went against something that you guys had agreed upon. Hence I say it's far more complex than people think it is. And when it comes to like policing and respectability politics, it would be interesting to have those conversations with people that think polyamory is immoral or, you know, quite rogue. And I'm not here to advocate for the respectability of polyamory. I'm really not interested in that. I think that these conversations need like a lot of nuance and specificity when we are speaking, especially let's say if you are speaking within a queer community or within a queer context. Basically polyamory going against our basic ideals of loyalty and trust and, you know, treating the next person with respect, because a lot of the time polyamory is seen as this thing that does not apply those beliefs. And regardless of your sexuality, those are things that a lot of human beings tend to uphold. So I think it's very important to shed light on that, even within a polyamorous context, even within a queer polyamorous context. And as I said, for me, this conversation is not even about trying to create respectability around the issue, but it's more so having an honest conversation about it, and possibly educating the next person who might not understand or might not have knowledge around it. Then going back to that conversation around sexuality, and particularly bisexuality or pansexuality, just so that I speak within my own lived experience. Conversations move forward when people become self-aware, people become articulate in their feelings. People's feelings are always valid in my eyes. Well, not always, but when it comes to like sexuality specifically, I think it's important to validate someone's feelings, even if they're on a journey and just thinking out loud or trying to articulate themselves. It's important to affirm those kinds of things, not try to police people's feelings. And I saw one of my friends was saying this is similar to straight identifying men who have sexual relationships with other men, and it gets down to like us really nitpicking these things, and that's what makes me really uncomfortable, because I think a lot of people are okay with terming sexuality as a spectrum, people self-identifying in various ways. Why is it becoming a problem when people actually do that? It's really kind of difficult to have honest conversations around sexuality if we still create certain prescriptions around it, and if we still want people to subscribe to certain ways of presenting. And that applies to anyone, like within the queer community. And sometimes I don't even think it's important for people to articulate how they identify. Like, I don't think coming out is important in my eyes. I've never come out to my family, I've never come out to my friends, I've never come out to anybody, but I just regard my sexuality as it. And I think it's a bit problematic for me to say that, because obviously I am cisgendered, and when people see me they will just assume that I am heterosexual or straight. So for some people, and a lot of people, the coming out process is important to assert yourself and define yourself. I'm not taking that away from anyone, but I really wish we could exist in a society that doesn't constantly expect us to define ourselves, explain ourselves, and not for the sake of yourself, but it's always for the spectatorship of other people, and it's always for the purpose of other people being able to place you in a box and understand you or try to make sense of you. Self-definition within the context of coming out is extremely empowering. It gives a person the ability to fully assert their being. So I really think that it is important, but I think some people, particularly black, young, poor people, don't have that privilege to be, you know, self-defining and asserting themselves, when they largely depend on extremely homophobic people for their livelihood. You need to mediate the best option for yourself. Transactional or compensated relationships, or what did they call it? Intergenerational partnerships. The term compensated relationships I got from Lebohang Masango. Cross-generational partnerships I got from Madipoane Masenya, African scholars who have looked at issues regarding romance, sex, intimacy, relationships. And I'm looking at it through an academic lens first, because I think it's important to understand what grounds these kinds of interactions historically, before we even get into like how they are seen within popular culture or how they're seen within mainstream media. So I really like the way Lebohang Masango and Madipoane Masenya look at these relationships, because they trace the roots of how heterosexual romantic relationships have been, specifically the institution of marriage. Like, these are the kinds of relationships that have always been transactional to a certain extent. Like, marriage as an institution has always been interested in how money is spent, how money is made, and how that contributes to the marriage or the relationship at large. I think this is particularly important within our South African context, and that's because we kind of went through ages where there was always a mass visibility of women who could be termed as blessees, as slay queens, as sugar babies, and it's always the same kind of rhetoric, but there's just always a different name. And I think with social media, there's been a heightened visibility of these said women because they get to display their, you know, lavish lifestyles and their experiences, and this stuff can tend to go viral, and it is open to wide criticism. Not all compensated relationships are cross-generational. Most instances they tend to be, and not all compensated relationships are heterosexual. A lot of the time we are shown the narrative of the young woman with an older wealthy man. And the reason I'm discussing this today is not particularly in the context of blessers or blessees. Like, I feel like we've exhausted those types of conversations, but I'm more interested in how cross-generation plays a role within those relationships and the kinds of dynamics that can be presented to us through those relationships. I think these conversations were kind of being had on Twitter when one of the, you know, prominent influencers in South Africa said that she doesn't have a problem with younger girls dating older men. And I think this, when it's an isolated statement, is not problematic until you place it within the confines of the woman being an underage teen girl and the man being an over 18 man. So that's kind of what makes it tricky, because now we are entering the dangerous terrain of perpetuating rape culture. So if I, for instance, have been in a relationship with someone that was older than me while I was in high school, although at the time my younger self might not have seen anything wrong with it, at this big age I should certainly be able to understand that, you know what, that was not right. Like, it doesn't make sense for a working man to be dating a teenage girl, regardless of age, regardless of whether she's 17 or 18 or 14 or 15, because I think we tend to get tied up in the semantics of what the law allows. And like, we need to be real about the law, especially in South Africa, because the law is just the bare minimum. Like, the law is technically doing the least, but if you are trying to be an ethical human being, you should not even be flirting around that terrain. And you can start entertaining that same conversation when it comes to compensated relationships, because I think there are nuances that apply to those relationships as well, which we probably were not ready to engage yet, because we were still like trying to fight for the agency and the, you know, self-empowerment of said slay queens and lessees. But now I think it's time for us to be honest. I'm coming from the position of someone that's been in these relationships, like someone that not only was sexually assaulted or rather raped by someone that was much older than me when I was in high school. I'm coming from the position of also someone that thought that I was being completely autonomous in my relationships with older men when I was like in my early years of university. So for instance, my very first relationship in university was with a 25-year-old and I was only 19. And then the second relationship was with a 34-year-old and I was probably 20 or 21. And at the time, Mr. Man, who was 34, didn't even tell me that he was 34. He said he was 28. And then upon dating, I think I saw his driver's license, and it definitely confirmed that Mr. Man was 34. I remember being in a stage where I genuinely thought that I could not date someone my age. Like, I was very okay with that idea. I didn't see anything wrong with it. I thought that men were childish, like men who were my age, and they were the problem, not me. And you know, I was perfectly within my rights to date someone who was up to 10 years or more older than me. And this is not even within now the context of transactional relationships. It's just from the socialization that women or girls are more mature than boys. And I have so many issues with that kind of thinking, because there is no study that can conclusively deem boys as less mature than girls. There are certain things that have, you know, been proven to say that certain elements of girl children develop before boy children, but that does not equate to girl children maturing earlier than boys. Black girls are seen to be fast, or black girls are seen to be mature, or you know, because our bodies are shaped in certain ways and society tends to sexualize certain things. That's when that whole process begins, because I'm very interested in engaging that idea of grooming even before we start talking about transactional relationships, compensated relationships, intergenerational relationships. I think it starts from an early age when you as a teen have been manipulated and groomed. And most of what I'm saying is coming from personal experience, and some of it is just from research. But let's say you are like a 15-year-old girl and your first sexual encounter is rape. You think that you are in a loving relationship with somebody who is 18 or older, and the person manipulates you enough to get to sleep with you, and there's a lot of manipulation that goes on to get you to that point, because this person has told you that you are mature for your age, you're so beautiful, you are this, you are that, you're a woman, like all sorts of things that shouldn't be said to a child to begin with. And because our relationships with our parents and our families in this country tend to be on the messed up side, we don't even have the space to communicate these things. So you'll probably have the conversation with an older cousin who will tell you that's normal or that's how things go, because they were also socialized in that particular way. So you end up in this vicious cycle of girl children, and this applies to all genders, but I'm just particularly speaking to the case of girl children who have been groomed and manipulated sexually, and by the time they are of age, they don't even see themselves as victims of sexual abuse. This is such a difficult conversation to have, I'm not gonna lie. I'm low-key triggering myself as I speak. For that particular person who's always seen themselves as independent to now view themselves as a victim of sexual abuse when they were manipulated to believe that they wanted that relationship, they had agency in that relationship, when to be honest they didn't, because they were not of a consenting age. There's absolutely no way you can have the ability to fully comprehend a sexual experience or be even on equal footings with the person you're in a relationship with, because that person is manipulating you daily, grooming you daily, where people are in lifelong relationships with the people who groomed them. And it's kind of sad, because those are the relationships we grew up seeing. If you look at your parents who are married, chances are your mother was groomed, your grandmother was groomed, and some people are even proud of these things, like, oh, I met your mother when she was only 16, or oh, you know, this and this happened. And it's because we've been taught that get them while they're fresh or get them while they're young. After 12, it's lunch. Oh, I'm hungry. I'm literally always hungry. On that demon time, she might start on OnlyFans. Yes, yes. Woo! Oh goodness. Safa studio esicha. I feel like I do the same eye every week. The most is, yo, I'm going through it. I'm going through it.